Here on the season with Peter Schrager, we like to have the most interesting guests, the most connected guests, and give you the story behind the story. And for this week, after putting up 70 points in a ball game, my immediate thought was like, let's get Mike McDaniel on the show. Then I was like, all right, I know Mike. We'll get him on in the offseason when he can be truly candid. Who is the closest person to Mike McDaniel that I can bring on? Who is someone who knows his story from the very start? And who is someone who has as connected in this league as anybody when it comes to coaches? And that person, he's the founder of Collective Sports Advisors and the QB Collective. He's one of the premier identifiers of coaching talent, but also quarterback talent. And I just think he's a fascinating story. Guys, you might not know his name off it. You will love this guest, and he is with me now. Richmond Flowers III. Richmond, how are you, man?
I'm good, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So I'm watching McDaniel pour it on and then call off the dogs, and then the backups come in and they're pouring it on and he tries to call off eventually they just had to take a knee to end this thing. And I'm like, what a story for Mike. Mike was an assistant for Shanahan all these years, waiting his turn, blocked interview here, blocked interview there, finally gets an opportunity to interview for the Dolphins head coaching job, gets it. There are skeptics. They go to the playoffs last year, and now it's like he's the toast of the town. When did you first meet Mike McDaniel? And then we're going to tell the story of your connection with him to where you both are right now.
I actually met Mike. It wasn't when he came to the Redskins after year one. I believe he came in 2011. But I met Mike. So I had been calling Mike Shanahan and Kyle for about 2 to 3 years at this point. It was 2010. I had just had my first child. My wife was still in the hospital. And, after, again, 2 years of calling Mike Shanahan, trying to be ready if I could get an opportunity. And, in fact, he was going to hire me to the Denver Broncos through Jeremy Bates, but then he got fired after the last game. So anyways, fast forward 2010, Mike Shanahan calls me up. We're in the middle of running around Cedars-Sinai, and Mike Shanahan says, Richmond, meet me at the Combine in Mobile. And so I jumped on a plane, kind of felt kind of bad for my wife at the time, knowing that she was probably going to find out what it's like to be a coach's wife.
Yeah.
And very quickly. And so I go down to Mobile. My interview was pretty seamless. It was, Richmond, you're hired. And Mike was there the whole time. Mike was there. He was in the Alliance at the time, I think the Sacramento team. And he was there around Kyle, had been with him at the Texans, obviously, and he was running around. He had his sort of a presentation in PowerPoint that he had done where he had charted the run game efficiency and the correlation between the play action passing game and the run game and the efficiencies of the system. And you could tell he was super smart. And he was down there the whole week, and we were hanging out for a little bit.
This is Mobile, Alabama Senior Bowl. You're interviewing for a job. And for the listeners, you had a prominent college career. We remember you on Hard Knocks. You tried out for the Cowboys. You didn't have a long NFL career, but you were like, I still want to get into the league. So you end up being a coach. And when you interview for the job, there's 25-year-old Mike McDaniel with his glasses interviewing you. How's that go down?
So like I said, Mike didn't come in until the next year. Mike was he was Kyle's ace at the Texans. Widely documented. He had some issues. So did Gary Kubiak, sent him on a hiatus. And then Mike was still at the Sacramento team at the time. When I did walk in there, again, I'd like to, tell you that I had some extensive interview, but again, I was really Kyle's buddy from college that played in the NFL and that would go home with him back to the Broncos and Mike Shanahan's house in college and train with the Broncos. So I'd been around him. We were super close, and the trust factor was there. So I think the fact that I played in the NFL meant that he could get away with hiring me. In my case, I'm probably the one guy who was like, he did hire his friend.
This is 100% true. I played with Kyle at Duke, and I became the coach with Kyle. Yeah,
I am the guilty party there when it comes to Kyle hired his friend. But he knew I'd get out there and kind of fight and figure it out.
So you're coaching with Washington. Who's in that room in 2011?
In that room is Sean McVay was the other quality control coach with me. Matt LaFleur had his first quarterbacks coaching job. You had obviously Kyle. You had Chris Verster. you had John Embry, Bobby Turner, the great running backs coach.
Legendary running backs coach, yeah.
Right. And you had Chris Morgan, who's currently the offensive line coach of the Chicago Bears. He had come from working with Tom Cable and became Chris Verster's assistant. And that was it. Oh, Keenan McCardle. Keenan McCardle, actually, you track back to all the different times before even I was a coaching agent. But Keenan and I were at the Jacksonville Jaguars together. And, he was a savvy vet. And so I kind of walked up to Keenan at the Senior Bowl during that exact same time and said, "Hey, Kyle, you need to meet Keenan. He's a hell of a wide receiver, knows the position. Good dude. Talk to him. Kyle hires him." So it was Keenan, John Embry, Bobby Turner, Chris Verster, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Kyle, myself. And I like to say, I walked into the building and, it doesn't take very long to realize that because you played in the NFL that you're a little bit behind and that you've got a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Sean, I really couldn't probably turn on the copying machine, and Sean could take it apart and put it together.
So the McDaniel thing, you guys start coaching together. When do you make the change to say, I don't want to be an NFL coach. I want to actually be an NFL agent and represent these guys?
The truth is, when my dad's roommate in college was Jim Bates, so I'd grown up around Jeremy. We went to the Johnny Majors football camp growing up, and I actually almost transferred to Sevier County High to be his wide receiver. It tells you the kind of family I come from, where you're like a guy who lives in Sevier County alone to catch footballs. So I was super close, had tracked his career, tracked Kyle's career. I think at the time I was slinging apartment buildings at L.A. For Howie Roseman's brother-in-law, actually.
What's the story? Mindy's brother is who you were working for?
They have all these brothers, and one of them went to Duke with me. So I got connected to Matthew Friedman, and I was slinging apartment buildings, sitting in a cubicle after selling luxury real estate for Roger Staubach when the market tanked. And so I'm sitting there going, I'm pretty sure I need to get back to what I know and love in football. And I hate this desk. And I just want the sun to hit me in the face. I got to get the hell out of here. Even though the one profession that I always kind of knew that I wanted to kind of stay away from was coaching, to be honest with you. As a player, that's all I ever wanted to do is play. I really never saw myself as coaching. But I think sometimes it takes losing football, leaving what you love, and losing kind of a focus of being around the thing that you really love and know to really want it back. So really, my strategy was to go check it out, get thrown in the middle of it all. It was obvious that you were going to kind of be in the path of progress. And so the opportunity to get down there and be around Mike Shanahan and Kyle and all those guys, it was more of I believe I could be a really good agent. And I know that I'll be a better agent if I'm thrown into the middle of whatever Mike Shanahan's going to do next. And so I kind of had a hunch walking in. In fact, before I went to this incubator, the Ashburn Park, situation.
It really does feel like it's like one of these like tech stars type deal. Totally. Like you go to the Washington Redskins at the time, Commanders building in that era. You're either with the Gruden tree with Raheem Morris and all those guys, or you're with the McVays, LaFleurs, and Arthur Smith was there. Like everyone was in Washington at some point or another.
It's insane. And, all the, you do, I mean, you look back at the Gruden staff and you see Ejiro Evero was, he and I were quality control coaches later. In fact, Sean helped strategically connect me to Ejiro. You mentioned Arthur Smith. When I was in high school, I'd go up to Memphis and train in a strip mall with a guy named Dean Lotz, who's now deceased. And Richard Smith, Arthur Smith's brother, was actually training in that gym, and he and I became super close. I remember walking onto the Fred Smith compound, and I took like 10 yards in, and a paintball whizzed right by my face. And it was Arthur's younger brother, Gannon, was in the bushes dressed like a military man, shooting me down with a paintball gun. So, go way back with a bunch of these people. And, it was just a pretty amazing, and it is similar to kind of like a Y Combinator when, and interestingly, before I moved to Washington, I actually was living in, before I met my wife, kind of a frat style house up in the Hollywood Hills with kind of the equivalent of the young guns at from the mailrooms of CAA and UTA.
Who we got? We're a pop culture and sports podcast. Who we got? You with Arya Manuel, like opening up envelopes? What are we doing?
Seriously, I mean, the head of motion picture talent and the head of William Morris Endeavor Music were like, bunkmates before. So kind of left that environment, came down to Washington, such a unique experience, unlike, any.
But you thought you might be, I mean, you're now saying like, hey, I begged Kyle and Mike for a job, just take a shot. But you thought maybe in the back of your head, like, let me do that step, get to know this profession inside and out, because ultimately these guys, I want to represent some of these guys. Is that what you thought? Like it was already planned, or you had like an awakening and in a eureka moment, like, hey, I actually don't want to coach. I want to do the business side of this.
Well, when you're bringing a wife into the coaching profession, I knew better than to tell her that odds are I'm going to transition over into representing coaches, because it's such a sacrifice and such a grind, be a daunting thing to kind of tell your wife that you're really not going to do this. But the reality is I went in thinking I might do it and that I loved elements of it. I figured out my path, but ultimately, when you recognize what you're really good at and what you can be really good at, and then, you have to be honest with yourself and assess if you have a ceiling or not. And I kind of didn't see myself as, you can't hide it. When you're around Sean and you're around Matt and they're staying up all night long talking about cards and little details and motherfucking each other over where a guy was on the scout team. And I'm sitting there going, God, why don't these guys go home and see their family? Yeah. And, and the truth is, like, I wasn't obsessed and in love with the X's and O's. And that's what that environment was. And so I think that I went in with an open mind, loved working with young players. How couldn't you? But when it came to like digging in and wanting to like stay up at night, thinking through how to, create a new play action passing concept, that wasn't me. And so I kind of found my way, was aware of the industry. I was aware that there was not another person representing coaches that had coached in the NFL. Now, I didn't know that I would not only coach in the NFL, but coach with the youngest staff ever assembled that would, revolutionize the NFL. But at the end of the day, I was aware of it. And, and it was right around the time CAA sports was getting started. And just kind of thought like, good things would happen if you throw yourself into the middle of something led by Mike Shanahan. I had so much respect for him and had known him for a really long time. And Kyle was really my best friend at the time.
Who was your first client when you leave coaching and you say, I'm going to be a coaching agent? I know that there's, titans of the industry, whether it's Jimmy Sexton or Bob Lamont, these guys have a stronghold on all these head coaches and there's legends told about them. Here's this young gun coming from being an active coach to now I'm going to be an agent. Who was the first client that said, I'll jump on that wing with you?
I mean, the first client was Mike McDaniel, because we really sort of sat in the room together for 2 years and we would just talk about all this stuff. I mean, we would talk about the vision for our careers. We would talk about the build out of collective and what it means and the importance of it. We would talk about where we're going to go. I had, I'll be the first one to tell you, because I think Mike's story is all about people needing to see it before they can believe it. And, and I'll never forget one of the first times I met Mike. It doesn't take it very long to show you his resume. And at the top of his resume, it's going to say, I'm going to be a Super Bowl winning head coach. And, and so I remember.
Wait a second. On the resume, it has that statement. It doesn't say Yale undergrad and coach of Texans. It says, I'm going to be a Super Bowl winning head coach. I mean, that sounds awfully arrogant to me.
It's absolutely arrogant. Didn't you see the play callers? That's Mike. I mean, it's that belief in self that separates him. I mean, but that is honest to God truth. Went to Yale, basically that's what it says at the top of his resume. And I remember at the time thinking, all right, just like I said, Mike came in the second year. And the funny part of that is Mike has probably me to thank or coming in the second year, because if you were to write down what I was probably really not very good at, it would have been the job description of the quality control that I was hired. And so, like, Kyle's tough, and I've experienced it firsthand. Well, he's a lot tougher when you're his buddy and you get hired. So my job was to look at one picture and find the little small detail that was the mistake, and then fix it. And I'd bring it to Kyle, and then he'd motherfuck me and send me back down the hallway. And so, like, he motherfucked me enough that it opened the door for Mike. And I think by the end of year one, you know, we should probably bring Mike in here. Now, we're not going to let him take Richmond's job. And so that's when he created himself into a run guru, because he went with Chris Verster at the O-line.
So you got Mike as a client. What year is that? Because it doesn't happen overnight for Mike McDaniel. He's an assistant for Kyle for a long ass time before he finally gets an interview to be a head coach.
Yeah. So my two first clients were it was Mike McDaniel and then Vic Fangio. And that's another story. But 2011, Mike comes in there, and, you know, for me, it's all about perspective and your experiences. And when you gain a perspective by being in this one-of-a-kind environment and having experiences next to each other, it changes you. And so, like, for me, I had the perspective of getting to see Keenan McCardle come in there. Then next year, Kyle brought in Ike. And I think that just like anything, when you get your opportunity to be a coordinator, Kyle's kind of finding his way and figuring out the dynamics of a staff and what works and what doesn't and the importance of it. Man, when Mike came in, you know, you see this unassuming guy that, you know, doesn't immediately strike you as this is the next Vince Lombardi. But, you know, as a former player, I had so much appreciation for the way that somebody could kind of distill in their mind how to teach a position, the progression, recall from plays that you know, that really aren't as hard to find, because when you love something so much, you know how to just piece it together. But Mike was so organized, and he had been collecting edits and building a library to teach from. So I remember when I saw him on his Exos computer one day, and I walked over there, and he basically showed me how he breaks down the wide receiver position. And I'll never forget, I really learned more in that discussion than I had learned in the previous 2 years, but as a career trying to be a professional wide receiver. And so because of the way that he broke down the opponent, he broke down the different techniques of the starting at the line with press coverage, whether it's soft shoe man or it's cloud, how to attack it, the different techniques, the minute detail when you're running a route, whether, you know, how you're standing at the line, whether you're, you know, opening up to break it down, and then, you know, false acceleration and the details of how you come out of your breaks and catch the football. All of it was right there. And the way that he organized it gave me this picture, and it was like, holy shit. Okay. I now, you know, I just learned so much.
Yeah.
It was that experience combined with, you know, Kyle walked into my office one day when I was fucking up the pictures and basically said, hey, Richmond, you know, you got a chance to be my receivers coach one day, but you got to get these fucking pictures right.
Yeah.
And he wasn't probably thinking at the time that Mike was going to become the wide receivers coach. But when you're in the meeting room and you're watching the players and the way they respond to him, and you have a comparison, and then he walks in, this unassuming guy who's super authentic, who's put all this work in and has been staying up all night long and can stay up all night long and you know, stay focused on the task. Man, every word that he said, those guys listened to. They hung on everything. He put him in a position to succeed. He would give him tips. It was Pierre Garçon and Leonard Hankerson and Santana Moss. And those guys were so attentive. And you realized, I don't care what anybody says, this guy is going to be a fucking good receivers coach. He's going to be a great coach, because what is more important than the players just listening to your every word, believing and knowing that investment that you're making every time you walk into that meeting room. I mean, and that's second to none.
I met Mike when he was with Cleveland for that year, and then he was with Atlanta, and it was always this I was always tight with a lot of those guys, but he had the flat brimmed hat always before it was cool. He'd wear the giant hat. He'd have his sunglasses on. And before the game, he was, 20 something year old guy. And let's call it like it is, unassuming, gangly white guy with glasses coaching elite NFL wide receivers. And yet they would respond to him in such a way where it was like, oh, this guy's got swag. He's got something to him. Did you know that right away when he walks in the room that, immediately, like he passes the eye test of this dude's the real deal?
I became friendly with Andrew Hawkins, and
Yep.
it's widely documented how much he respects and loves Mike. And I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, at the time, the truth is Mike was the only run game coordinator, wide receiver that had probably ever existed in the NFL.
Yeah.
For the Cleveland Browns, which makes sense because Kyle was hired late, and so there were some other coaches on the staff, and it gives you a little insight into the importance of staff continuity. And, it's also widely documented what a great job Kyle's done keeping his staff together and how he's fiercely fighting for his people. Because, that investment that you're making in the coaches on your staff, man, this system's teaching you to look at the world differently, not just the game, because you're building based on what you don't know. And I feel like it, one of the things that became real apparent, and I was so fortunate to be around so many people with a lot of great experiences in the league, but, a bunch of young guys that felt like innovation was the norm and everything everywhere else is like this, which
It's not the case.
really not absolutely not the case. Now, I don't think those guys ever stopped to realize that other places aren't like this, so it's a benefit to them. But for me, not sure if I wanted to coach, I was kind of looking for the next thing and my path. And so when Chris Verster would always say, Richmond, I've been in the league for a long time. I've worked for Denny Green. I've worked for Tony Dungy, and these are all amazing coaches, but this is different. This is such a football-focused environment. It's all about the right things. You're getting empowered here. You're not just being told what to do. You're serving with a real purpose, and the experiences and how everybody was prepared to have success. You knew. And so when Chris would say that to me, I started thinking, wait a second. So we're learning something super rare that, 98% of the other, organizations and staffs probably aren't doing things exactly like we're doing them. And that just kind of meant that I was building equity in something. By the time I left, I mean, you when you're a part of a one-of-a-kind environment. I mean, you just know it. You feel it. And that was exciting to me because I didn't know exactly where things would go, but I knew whatever was happening was special, and you just had a gut. So did everybody else. But ultimately, when Kyle brought Mike to Cleveland, that's so important to have someone who's lived it, who's been there, who can teach the other coaches and set the standards. And, and so that was a really big deal. And I think Kyle would have brought some other people along with him, but he was, hired a little late.
So Kyle then goes to Atlanta, brings Mike with him, and then Kyle gets the head job in San Francisco, brings Mike with him. And then for years, Mike is on staff. And then finally, a head coaching opportunity. It's him or Kellen Moore. I'm not solving any secrets. People know that. What was the interview process for Mike McDaniel post Brian Flores going into Miami? And how did you prep him for that meeting with Stephen Ross, who could be a pretty intimidating guy?
Interestingly enough, Mike had actually had an opportunity to basically have a kind of a virtual interview, and they had a little exposure to him. I'll never forget, I got a phone call from Brandon Shore. Mm-hmm. And, Mike's journey is special to me because, it did take him 5 years. And I don't know if that's exactly how long it took, but the bottom line is it took him longer than it should have. And I think the timing worked out, and everything, in life is about timing. And you look at kind of the situation of the Miami Dolphins and the way they were transitioning, Mike became the perfect fit, kind of what they were looking for at the time. And so, like, there's probably not a team in the NFL that I hadn't spoken to over the past 5 years or person to talk to him about Mike. And this was it. This was the opportunity. This was the one team that was going to believe in him. And they were like, "Hey, Richmond, we're taking a serious shot here. Mm-hmm. We mean business. We're interested." And the culmination of everything that's happened for Mike's been amazing. I mean, you look back at Atlanta, and I remember even, you kind of look at Mike and how you go from being this quality control coach or this unassuming guy. I used to say, look, I mean, Mike's trajectory is pointing up. The guy was in the broom closet at the Falcons, and you look at, I got a phone call one day from Tom Pelissero, and we were talking, and Mike's alcohol issues are also widely documented, and I think that this is a league that can be difficult. If you make certain decisions and you have some road bumps, not everyone makes it back. I think it's a testament to Mike and his focus and his drive, but ultimately, that was lingering over Mike. Rightfully so. And I think that there was this moment where, he needed to get that behind him. And he was in this amazing place. And I was talking to Tom, and I kind of just said, you know what, Tom, you need to talk to Mike. You need to spend some time with him. He's been through some interesting moments and times, and he's growing. And I kind of left it at that and put those guys in touch so they could talk, and Mike opened up, and you look back at at the Super Bowl when the Falcons played the Patriots.
Sure.
Tom was at USA Today at the time, and that's when he put that article out there where Mike talked about his problems, and I think he became a real guy then, and human, and a little bit more eyes were on him. And then, the reality is, the talent is undeniable, and the amount of work and the relentless nature is there. And I think, the one element of when you think about Mike, you think about what do the players say? And those players, they're not being asked to say anything. They want to say something because they feel a special closeness and appreciation for those who can help impact their career. Between Kyle and Chris Furster and Mike and all these guys that just invest in the development of those players, those guys are singing his praises, and you ask them and it sounds different. And I think it was really easy once a team actually decided, you know what, we're really going to take a real look here. We're not worried about what some people say, or we're not worried about that, Mike can't hold a room, can he? All these things that you're seeing that, Mike's special qualities and what people are, all of the rage about, those were the elements that people were afraid to pull the trigger.
Yeah, of course. That, his eccentricity, if you will, like sprinting from the Steadicam guy on the Sunday night after the Melissa Stark interview, or with me last year in Buffalo, and we're having this like ridiculous interview mid-game, and people are like, he's goofy. I'm like, he's authentic. He is who he is. He's not trying to impress anybody with like some like cliche or some like. Mike is funny as hell, but he's also smart, and he also is authentic. And I think the players respect that.
Well, there's no doubt. And, he was a part of that situation. I mean, you look at Tua, and you look at what he's doing with Tua, and then you ask yourself, and as long as you're honest with yourself, and you say, who wanted that job at the time, and who was ready to take on Tua? Well, I mean, it's widely documented that many people were not ready to take on Tua. There were people who wanted to bring in Tom Brady. There were people who wanted to figure out other quarterbacks. Mike not only embraced Tua, but made it the centerpiece of his candidacy with the Miami Dolphins, and spent hours upon seeing something that probably very few could see, found it, knowing not only the importance that he needs to sell this team, but the importance of needing to sell Tua, that he has someone who fully believes in him. And Mike just knows the power of that. Why? Well, he's walked the shoes of somebody that no one's ever believed in, that grew up with this vision for where he wanted to go. And so much of Mike's career is been preparing for it since he was, this kind of lonely kid raised by a single mom, and then those experiences, whether it was starting and building with Kyle in Houston and then having it taken away and then going back to Washington, being a part of this year in 2012, where all these young, driven coaches, at the beginning of their careers were given the task of building a system around a quarterback that they didn't know how to use. And I think that Mike articulated it so amazingly when we were preparing for his interview, that experience shaped them all. and it's really an extension of what's happening with Tua, is that they had been through that. They had experienced it. They had come together in a really collaborative way and shaped a system that allowed a player to excel, that other people weren't sure if he was fit for the NFL. Well, Tua is no different. And Mike walked in and probably sat down with the Miami Dolphins and told them that this was a great investment. And then for them to see and understand Mike, he's an innovator. In this league today, so many coaches pull up the big play reel and they look at what's working. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, imitation is the best form of flattery.
Yeah.
But ultimately, someone's creating, and there's other coaches that are creating in
Sure.
this league. But there's no question that Mike probably, was pretty confident in letting that organization know that he's going to bring innovation. He's going to bring a culture. He's going to bring exactly what they were looking for at the time. And it was an amazing kind of one of those moments when, I think in my career, you set these North Stars and things that you want to happen. That's how it's why you love what you do. And I actually didn't start by building a coaching agency per se, because at the time when you get into this industry, one of the things that I noticed is you would ask coaches about an agent, and most of them really said the same things. Yeah, I have an agent. I don't really talk to them that often. No, they didn't help me get this job. And I'm not really sure why I pay them. And so at the time I thought to myself, well, that's one profession I'm going to stay away from. I don't think it has that much upside for my family.
Yeah.
And then it was thinking about that. And then also having this great appreciation for living in the shoes of a coach
the
in the
craft.
demanding environments.
Yeah.
And, just realizing how much more opportunity that these coaches could provide outside of just their day-to-day jobs. And, Mike was such a big part of helping me build some of the things that we did to build the agency, the events outside to network with coaches, knowing that 10 teams would want to run that system in the next 5 years. Yeah. And so all the video and interviews and things along the way, thinking, man, one day this guy's going to get an opportunity.
Let's so you've got Mike as your first client, and obviously he's your
Yeah.
North Star, and it all. But for the listeners, just to name a few, you represent Brandon Staley, you represent Robert Saleh, you mentioned Evero. You've got
Yep.
a very deep client. So is there a recruiting process of, hey, I'm identifying these talented guys? Because you've been with Saleh for a long time, and he was also a quality control guy in Houston.
Saleh, you could argue Saleh was also my first client. It was kind of Mike and Saleh and Fangio. I left after those 3 years in Washington and went to the San Francisco 49ers. And that's always when you're able to look back on, you go somewhere and you think one of two things. I'm super prepared or I'm behind the eight ball. And I got there and thought to myself, I'm super prepared. I went from being what was probably the worst guy on the staff to like elite NFL knowledge in my own mind. But also I experienced an offensive staff who really didn't want to hear my perspective, even though we were trying to engineer plays for Colin Kaepernick, watching Washington Redskins film.
Yeah.
And it struck me that Chris Verster, this is what he was talking about. And, you knew at the time then that like, I need to stay connected to all those guys because something's really special. And I realized kind of two things. One, it was obvious what I was going to do is build a coaching agency, but only build with rules that focused on the spawn of the coaches that came out of the Shanahan tree. And then when I went to the 49ers, I realized that was a little closed-minded because there was a guy on the defensive side of the ball that reminded me of a guy who would have been a perfect fit at the Washington Redskins in Vic Fangio. And, Vic and I became close without really knowing each other. I think there's this like unspoken relationship that says, well, the best defensive mind knows what the best offensive coaches are doing and who they are. That's his job. And so there was a great appreciation. And I think he knew that I came from a place that, kind of had a pretty good sense of what good offense was. And so we had a great relationship. I think it was probably around that same time that you started seeing, articles being written left and right about from Sean and Matt and Kyle about how defense, Vic Fangio is
Fangio defense. They can't solve it.
Best defensive coach that ever lived. And ultimately I became really super close with him. And, to just be really honest with you, I mean, you're around him and all you're thinking is that this guy's a head coach. And you look at Stanford and you look at 49ers and you look at the Bears and you look at the Broncos and you look at the experience. And there's this thing that binds a lot of these people together, especially the guys that we represent. It didn't happen for them overnight.
Yeah.
And I think that gives you a perspective and an appreciation. And what I kept hearing from different general managers throughout the league, he's just a defensive coordinator. He's the best, but he's not a head coach. In my mind, well, I mean, if you've got a defensive coordinator who gets you to number one every single time, every single season, essentially within 2 to 3 years, I mean, that's a head coach. And so, Vic ended up making a transition and became one of my first clients. And I learned a lot from him. And really, he was the first guy who became a head coach. And it was super rewarding because you kind of, just like any other coach, you need someone to believe in you.
Yeah.
You just need someone to believe in you. And then it's that, two-way street working together with a commitment, once you just see it. And as long as it means as much to both of you, it was super cool to watch Vic get that opportunity. But,
all right. So you got Vic as your veteran guy. You've got Mike McDaniel as your junior guy, if you will. But one of the things I love that you put together that always comes out online in the off season, you'll put all these guys together and they're coaching high school and college kids. And there's these seminars and I'm watching in action Mike McDaniel coach because you guys are filming it in the QB Collective stuff. If you can't find this online, guys, go look it up. Mike McDaniel coaching or Sean McVay coaching. And I remember Hackett this summer was like, got to go out to Vegas. I'm doing this thing for Richmond, the Quarterback Collective. What is it, and where was the genesis of that, where you get all these coaches together and then you film them actually coaching, which ultimately leads to great content because we don't see that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, that came as a result of my experience as a player and then combined with the experiences in Washington. Man, after those 3 years, all you could think of was, God, I wish I had this stuff as a player when I was a kid. I wanted it so badly, I didn't know where to find it, and I didn't know it exists because it didn't. And you knew whatever you learned and the way that you saw the world at that point in life, it was too late for me as a player, but it wasn't too late to figure out how, to realize that this would have changed my life, would have given me an opportunity to have been half as talented and played twice as long by having this access to this knowledge. And so like I mentioned, it was a one-of-a-kind experience. I wanted to give that to someone else, and that you knew that you needed to, if Chris Verster said that no other staff's like this, and then you believed that you were going to build out of the lineage that would grow in the future, you also then at that point know that, wait a second, Senior Bowl Combine, that's 2 events. And if you don't go to those, you're shit out of luck. And if you do go to them, if you're lucky enough to grab a beer next to someone, that'll be the catalyst for the rest of your career. That could be the reason you get hired. So it wasn't very hard to get people hired. And you needed an event where you could bring people together that had the context of what we experienced in Washington, because you knew that was really powerful. So even if you could get a taste of it, it could impact. And so what we did is really just started building, brought in the top quarterbacks in the country, brought back, as a favor, Sean, Kyle, Matt. We had Kevin O'Connell was there the first year, a great group of people. And then, that these parents and these coaches, these are the market experts. They've been taking their kid all over the world to go see all these events. They just needed to see this product. And coaches were not impacting in that space. Private coaches were, and people with social media were essentially exploiting parents and players. And so in my mind, this was how you could look at agency differently. Insert these coaches at the top of the food chain and allow them to then insert leadership into a space that really had none. And then that was the hunch. The only way you find out if you're onto something is that you get those guys there.
Got to execute.
let them run the event and then watch. And these parents and these coaches and everybody, it was almost like the parents had found the fountain of youth, and they were so excited, and they were hanging on every word. We focused on the classroom versus the field, because that was something that you really couldn't get and see. And it was just this amazing experience that kind of confirmed that, to a certain degree, picking up on what Verster said, if this was so rare, then we needed to build the VIP room of coaching. We didn't need to tell people that. We said it's the QB Collective, but it's a development pipeline for coaches and quarterbacks to identify, develop, represent, led by the brightest minds in the NFL.
It's cool. It's like the Avengers. You watch these videos, and I hope we have the right. I mean, Aaron, can I toss to some sound of McDaniel from this? We'll get the approval right there, Richmond. There we go.
Oh yeah,
and we'll play it. But like, you hear McDaniel, he's talking to high school kids, but he's really talking to the world, because this is a rare opportunity. And you guys smartly turn the cameras on, and we get an opportunity to listen how these guys actually coach, not just their press conferences. All right, so we hear McDaniel there. We hear McDaniel there. Like, that's what it's like being in the quarterback's room.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, and then getting all those guys. And the truth is, when we first started, I didn't know exactly why. I knew I truly did know. You did know that these guys were all going somewhere. You knew that this system would catch fire. You also knew that it would grow so fast that the traditional way of building a coaching staff was out the door, because it was going to grow so quickly that people were not going to hire people they had actually worked with before. And so could this event replace having worked with someone on a staff by spending 3 days with them in the right context? Absolutely. And so, to a certain degree, you put this forward knowing that let's capture it all. In my mind, there was like, maybe one day this will turn into kind of the Last Dance. As the whole entire league goes through this like transformation, at a bare minimum, we'll be able
footage
to
of something. From day one.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you would go back and you would look at this stuff and you would see Sean, spitting fire to young kids that happen to have Caleb Williams and Bryce Young and DJ Angalele and Tanner McKee and Matt Corral, and all these guys year one in 2016, because that event was focused on development, not trying to capture marketing opportunities as they enter college. It was truly about development. It was a truly authentic environment. And these coaches only knew one way, all in. And so over time, when you would look at that content, you didn't realize that you were building equity by listening to coaches. But at the same time, you were starting to see like, God, this guy's so good. And when you're watching these guys back to back to back, you just kind of take a mental note and build a library of the immense talents of some of the best teachers.
If I'm a parent of a high school kid who I think has a shot, like, is it one of those deals where I can sign him up and he could be a part of the quarterback collective, or is it you guys send invitations?
It's invitation only. I think long term, I always viewed the QB collective as the central nervous system of intelligence in the sport of football to grow into the future. And so that would be something, and we've toyed with it. I think 2 years ago we ran 46 camps and they were all sold out, and that was sort of available to everyone, but I felt like it was diluting the brand, and we needed to focus on this high-end invitation only, a network of private coaches that could kind of allow us to bring the best of the best into an environment, and then even make it smaller and bring the future, and really tutor and train and develop and give these guys a perspective that shows you very quickly that the value proposition is unlike anything that they've ever experienced in that space, because it truly would change their lives. When you get an opportunity to work with, you're sitting there in high school and it's Ben Johnson, and then Ejiro is giving you the perspective of a defensive coach, and Mike McDaniel and Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, and they're not just there, they're investing. They're coaching.
All right, we're going to wrap with a couple things, a little bit of rapid fire, if you will. You've got this long roster of notable names and guys who are doing it. You just mentioned Ben Johnson, who might be the hottest offensive coordinator in football. Give me a young guy, a position coach that maybe we don't know that you do represent, so you are a little bit biased, that you have high hopes for, that you think that we should all be keeping an eye on.
Well, Christian Parker's a guy that you look back. how do you identify these guys? Well, I'm not the oracle. You talk to your coaches, and there's 8 or 9 coaches on every staff max that identify with the other 8 or 9, and they'll tell you who they are because they want to take those guys with them to the foxhole. And so they watch what you do on a day-to-day basis. You can't hide. How do you respond when the chips are down? Who are you and what are you doing and how much do you love it? And so, you ask coaches, hey, do you have somebody on the staff that's going to be a dude one day? And the truth is, that's a name that kept popping up. You asked Butch Berry.
Who is Christian Parker?
Christian Parker is the DB's coach of the Denver Broncos.
Okay.
He went from quality control coach of the Green Bay Packers. Those guys sang his praises, and then became the defensive backs coach of under Vic Fangio, and didn't have to be the assistant. Was thrown right into the fire. His experiences with Vic. Now he's still in Denver. He's just a really bright young coach, moving in the right direction. You look at Joe Casper. Joe Casper is the safeties coach of the Miami Dolphins right now, and he's like a psychologist. He was back as an operations guy at Cleveland when Kyle was there. He was at the Philadelphia Eagles under Jonathan Gannon as a quality control coach. He's a guy that they didn't want to lose. He's a guy that that they wanted him to come to Arizona. But he's also a guy that got to meet Vic Fangio when he was with the Eagles, and Vic Fangio's got him down there at the Miami Dolphins. He used to be a quarterback's coach at Duke under Cutcliffe. Great experiences, super smart young guy, being led by the right person in Vic Fangio, and has a ton of upside. Just an example of a guy, just to name a few.
My next question: you've got 2 clients; they're vying for the same job. How do you handle that?
You know what? Everything that I've always, these are the discussions that come up, and they come up with every agent. How many guys do you have there like me? How many guys do you have on your roster? And I don't know. We're winning for the top 10 for sure. And because you surround yourself with the right coaches, and that the coaches are responsible for helping you quality control and identify the right people, and it's jointly done. And that if you're in part of our agency, that you weren't just there because I tapped you. You were there because people endorsed you and believed in you. And so the truth is, everybody's looking for something different, but there's so much growth happening. And so there's an opportunity for you. If it doesn't happen there, it's because there's 2 to 3 other opportunities, and you find what's right for you. It doesn't benefit anybody to be thrown into something that is not exactly right. You work too hard in this profession. Be patient, you wait, and you find the right opportunity, and it is what it is. I think more so than not, that's why we introduce people in the off season. That's why we're at these events. That's why we're virtual coaching. That's why we're working together and bringing our top coaches in, and they're acting as mentors so that they can get to know one another, so that we can get to hear people express themselves, so we can find real relationship fits and help accelerate and facilitate what an agent does, which is connect. And I think with the connectivity and the way that it's built within our business, our job is to make sure that everyone knows each other. Our job is to just make sure that there's not a guy sitting across the country from another coach that would be a great fit, and just because they couldn't come to one event, they're saying, well, I don't know him. Well, we're really looking at our business and trying to solve that.
My last question as we wrap this up, and it's amazing you mentioned the Senior Bowl, and that's where you really put your foot forward. I used to get sent to the Senior Bowl for FoxSports.com when I was a writer in, I'd say, early 2000s, and I have told the story in the podcast before. I knew I was never going to be John Fox's guy. I knew I was never going to be Rex Ryan's guy. I knew I was never going to be Sean Payton's guy. Those guys were of a different generation. But I saw young coaches. I didn't know who they were. So I would look at the staff of each team and try to find the youngest coaches. And one of those guys was Sean McVay, who was a 27-year-old tight ends coach with Washington. And I emailed him literally Sean.McVay@redskins.com and was like, hey, I'm 30, you're 27. Let's get a beer. I'm going to be in Mobile. He's like, yeah, sure. Let's do it. Just stress how important that Mobile, Alabama Senior Bowl thing is. If you want to be a coach or if you want to be in media, that's where you go. You don't go to the Super Bowl to meet people. You go to the Senior Bowl.
There's no question. I mean, and it can be kind of a depressing environment too, with a lot of people walking around with their resume. We're lucky we got that far. Hold on, let me put this back on here. Um,
Let's start
yeah,
over. You say that'd be no doubt. Yeah.
there's no question. I mean, that can be a pretty depressing environment as well. A bunch of coaches walking around with their cell phones and resumes. But, um, you know, Coach Shanahan and Kyle, the way that they picked that staff that's where I look back and it's kind of like, gosh, don't talk about it enough. For Mike Shanahan to allow, a bunch of young guys and 20 somethings come together like that, that he knew what he was looking for. And I met Sean down there, and the Senior Bowl is an amazing place, opportunity to meet a bunch of people. But whenever you mention just Sean, I mean, that's not a guy who figured it out later in life. That's a guy who also knew exactly what he wanted to do, how he wanted to go about it, was preparing for it since he was in probably fourth grade, went to the Miami of Ohio because it's the cradle of
Coaches. Yeah.
He helped me so much. Going in there, realizing how little I knew. I mean, he literally started from scratch, did for me probably what John Gruden did for him. He was training me to draw X's and O's and the importance of the detail. It doesn't take very long when you're around all those people that it just took these amazing individuals and then put them on an accelerator that was looking at football differently and looking at more. Because when you're building, you've heard the adage in football and coaching, like, we're not really worried about what they're doing. We got answers for it, and that was not this. This was
open mind. We might not have answers. Let's figure it out.
We don't know. We're gonna figure it out. We're gonna build based on what's being presented, and we don't know what's gonna happen. And then what happens forces you to think. And damn it, what happens? Yeah. Well,
busy guy.
What happens forces you to think in a way that you didn't, and so really you're seeing more. And I think that really that's sort of a good way of packaging up and saying, how did all these guys from the same staff have so much success so fast? Well, those experiences and then coming together and challenging one another to build and create and one up the other guy. I think they were looking at things more deliberately, 10x learning on a day-to-day basis. And then over time, when you get your opportunity, you do go to that next spot and you go, damn, I'm super prepared. Sean was an amazing example of that. And it's always been pretty amazing the way that he's supported and come on out to our events. And, he'll probably be sitting in your chair one day. So maybe. He's probably learning from you.
Maybe. I know that that almost happened a little earlier than expected. Richmond Flowers III. We didn't even get into your family's history with football. Incredible. You're a good man. You're a busy man. I appreciate you taking the time and specifically giving us a little window into the beautiful mind that's Mike McDaniel.
Absolutely. Do you want to do any of the Yerbay stuff at all?
Do you want to? How do we work that in?
Here's the only reason here's why it's cool. And it's not because I would promote Yerbay. When you went to build this stuff, I truly was building a digital education company. Mm-hmm. And so you start realizing, wait a second, if we actually pull this off, the greatest and highest use for it all is the immense talent of coaching. And if you can build what we've been building, it's essentially these brands will start realizing that actually we used to discount the coach and goes directly to the player. First of all, a lady named Didi Agar, who's the head of sports and entertainment at Goldman Sachs. She's been there for 39 years. We're super close. She's immensely respected in the industry. She came out to one of our events and it was the right event. It was Mike McDaniel spit and fire with Chris Furster and Frank Smith next to him and Brandon Staley in the background and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah sitting on the fringe with Mike Silver and Jordan Rodrigue and Nikki Jabavala and all these creator reporters and some of the young future of coaching letting Mike McDaniel hold court. And she saw that and it was super impressive. Fast forward 2 years, and we'd built a great relationship. Goldman Sachs is sitting right at the kind of in the central nucleus of kind of emerging brands. And she called me up and said, "Hey, look, you were looking for a sponsor for your event." And she introduced me to the founders of a company called Yerbay. Said it was an energy drink. Didn't think much of it. She put me in touch with them, and it was very clear that they were already engaged on the value of coaching. Now, you look at our business, and the truth is we built a coaching agency off of proving up that this thesis was right, that, these coaches needed to create this VIP room, the delineation between NFL coach and the really, really good ones. And so when you bring all those people together, you're building something that is not just, the coaching agency side of it is because you better represent those coaches. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time dealing with agents. But what you've then done is really build this VIP room of coaching. And what you believed and knew is that coaching had been discounted because there wasn't a virtual world. They couldn't reach a global audience. There hadn't been this new revolution. And so now that's what Collective represents, is the innovative, brightest minds coming together. I'm the doorman so that we can help pick coaches, not have them pick me. And then it's like, have them in there. And then what's the best use for that? And in my mind, when we got started, it was emerging technology, brands, using virtual coaching, and they're the new influencers in the NFL. Wow, these guys could accelerate and build and help integrate products into this very tough environment of the NFL without necessarily having to go directly through the NFL, because that's what these coaches deserve, is to maximize their talents. And so we looked at this as an incubator, and I was always sort of looking for the right product fit, because it's got to be right. And then she said, meet Todd and Carrie. Todd sold 4 different energy drink companies to Coke and Pepsi. Right. I mean, and so, but more importantly, you looked at the product fit: healthy energy, plant-based energy, the crap that's in those other energy drinks. Yeah. And more importantly, then you thought to yourself, hold on, this could work. Coaches are always going to be
always awake.
And they're always going to feel fine with having an energy drink that's healthy for you and it's plant-based, et cetera. And so for us, what this really was about was, let's see if we could partner up with a company like this that said, we don't do sponsorships. And so, wow, that was the real test. Would coaches invest in a product because they really believed in it, because they saw the product fit? And coaches will have a certain appreciation for getting that opportunity because they don't do sponsorship deals. They don't think they're worth, they're not thinking about anything besides, we believe
X's
in the
and
product
O's and the players,
and we like the way it tastes. And the truth is, you went and introduced yourself. I introduced them to Lincoln Riley and Kyle Shanahan and this amazing group of coaches, and they immediately all said the same thing. We like the way it tastes. We believe in it. They hadn't invested in other products, but they invested in this. And the truth is, what we're doing as a company is, we've got these amazing coaches, and now you live in this virtual world, and the head coach can bring that into and let it build the most efficient way through the staff, through the players. But ultimately, can coaching move the needle on emerging brands? Can coaching move the needle on a publicly traded company through influence at the highest level because they truly believe in the product? And we'll find out. If so, that's kind of where I see Collective going.
I respect that your mind is always working that way, and I respect that you gave us all this time. Richmond, thank you, bro.
Thanks for having me on.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.